Happy New Year and welcome back to the 2021 school year. Hopefully you had some time over the 2-week break to rest and find some renewal as a family with your loved ones. And as we return this week, we're so excited to welcome our students back. Whether you're in-person or online students, we're excited to welcome you back into the 2021 school year. You know, there were a lot of changes that happened over the 2-week winter break. Typically, it's a pretty quiet time, but during this 2-week break, there were a lot of changes. So I'd like to take some time today to update you on some of the changes. As you may have heard, there have been some changes to the quarantine rules as it applies to the classroom setting only. So I want to be really clear about this. It applies to a classroom setting that's following safety protocols, and those are specific safety protocols. We often refer to it as our safety bundle. And that means that all students and staff members in that classroom setting are wearing their mask over their chin and their nose. So it's a full cover to make sure that there's no possibility of exposure in that classroom. We also have other safety measures that we take here at Mason City Schools to make sure that environment is as safe as possible. So those changes are just applicable to those settings, the classroom setting. And what that means is that if a student is in that setting, they're no longer considered a close contact exposure. So before this change, if a student was sitting within 6 feet of another student, even if they had masks on, even if we were following safety protocols, they were under mandatory quarantine if they were within that 6-foot distance. The new rules change that, so there's no longer that mandatory quarantine from that setting only. Now, if we had other settings throughout our school building, it does not apply to that. So the quarantine rules that we've had in place all along will continue to be applicable to other settings in our school. One common question we've received since the changes in quarantine are whether or not we're going to communicate that information to our families if a student is in a classroom setting. Even though that classroom setting has been determined as safe, will we communicate that information to our families? And the answer is yes. We are committed to transparency at Mason City Schools, and we're committed to being in a partnership with you as a family. And so if that does occur in that classroom setting, our plan is to continue to communicate that with you. Now, here's what that will look like. It'll be what we'll consider a low-risk level letter that we'll send to you. So if you receive that letter, you'll hear that, yes, my child was in a safe setting, but they were in close proximity. Now, as a family, you may decide that you want to exercise your quarantine rights yourself as a family, and that's okay. We will honor that and we'll work with you. But you also have the opportunity to keep your child in school. Now, what it will mean is we would like everybody, if you receive a letter like that, to obviously monitor your child for symptoms over those 14 days. But we're already monitoring every day, making sure that our kids are healthy and safe before we send them to school. But that is something we would ask you to do. Now, there are other settings that are not classroom settings that we will still give you a letter and a phone call. So, for example, if your student is at lunch where their masks are taken off so they can eat, if there is a close contact exposure there, we'll treat that the same as we did before. So we'll give you the letter, and we'll give you a phone call, and we'll also give you the dates in which that quarantine process needs to take place. Another common question that we received is whether or not this is the right time for the state to make a change in the quarantine process based on the numbers being at new heights. And so we do recognize that the numbers that we see in our students in terms of the positive cases is higher. And we noticed that right after Halloween, we noticed it right after Thanksgiving, and we've noticed it and predicted it right after the winter break. And so what that tells us is that there is a pattern, that there are rising numbers when students are not in school or they are away and connecting with others in social settings. And so that's just a good reminder for all of us as parents to make sure that we are practicing these safety protocols not just in schools, but in our own personal lives as well. So I'll go back to the study and how the study worked. We worked with Ohio State and Wright State and medical experts from Children's Hospital to conduct this study. The study included 2 different groups. The study had a group of students that were in close proximity, which we called the close contact students out of the classroom. It also had students that were just a random sampling throughout our building. and usually in the same grade or a classroom or in other classrooms that were in close proximity to the class. And so what they did was they studied both of these groups, and they did not find any significant difference in the positivity rate between these two groups. And so as they did that in several schools across the state of Ohio, and this study has been conducted in other states, they looked at those and decided that if you're following the safety protocols in a classroom, then it's a safe setting for students and staff. Now, that's a classroom setting, and so that's what we've really focused on. So the quarantine rules really change only for that setting. And so that's why we have confidence in our health experts, confidence in the researchers, in their decision making. And at Mason City Schools, we're committed to making decisions based on data and based on scientific evidence. And so we'll continue that process. And you probably know, hopefully by now, that if we ever saw a concerning pattern within our school, ever, then we would make the decisions that are safest for our staff and our students, and we would take action right away. The rules that have changed for quarantine only apply to the classroom setting, because the classroom setting has a specific safety bundle that they're following, that safety protocol. It doesn't apply to other settings because in other settings, students aren't wearing their mask 100% of the time. And they're close enough in proximity that we want to be as safe and proactive as possible. So that quarantine process will still apply to those settings. For example, in our lunchroom, kids have their mask off to eat their lunch. So during that time, we will continue to apply the quarantine process to that setting. Even though we do have safety protocols in place with plexiglass and spreading out, it's still not the same as the classroom setting. We also, if you think about it, with sports, my sons play sports and they play basketball. When you're playing basketball without a mask on and you're in close proximity guarding somebody else, which you should be in close proximity if you're playing defense well, then there's no way that can be determined the same as a classroom setting where the kids are wearing a mask 100% of the time. So that's why the rules are different for different settings. And you know, as we learn more in the future, maybe some of those things will change in the future. I know one of the conversations we've had with Children's Hospital is whether or not could we study the lunchroom setting and how do we make that lunchroom setting even more safe than we already have, and is it already at full potential for safety? So those are things that we'll study and learn more, and as we do that, we'll obviously make our decisions based out of the data and the science. One question that's come up as well is whether or not we'll have RLE Wednesdays, that remote learning experience Wednesdays at the high school. And I just want to remind everybody how we got to the point of even determining to go that route. We decided to go with the RLE Wednesdays because our quarantine numbers were so high at the high school that the burden was great on our teachers as well as our families. Our students who are in quarantine needed the time to connect with our teachers. And so one of the strategies that we came up with was we would have this remote learning Wednesdays to give our teachers the time and space to connect with students who are in quarantine. It also gave them the time and space during the other days to connect with our students who are in person. Now that the rules have changed, and we're so grateful to the governor and to the research team that went through this process, it will lessen the burden of quarantine on our high school and on our whole system. And so we will commit to continuing to watch this through January and then moving back to a full in-person after January. That will be our plan for now unless we see some other pattern. And the reason for that is because we know that our families that chose in person, they want their kids to be in person. And so now that we have lessened that burden of the quarantine process, we'll move back to that full schedule. We've all heard that vaccinations are coming, and we're so excited for the potential of vaccinations because it's the next step towards moving out of this pandemic and keeping everyone safe and stopping the spread of COVID-19. And so one of the things that we've talked a lot about here is when will our staff have the opportunity to have vaccinations? Because you've probably heard the governor talk that educators are the next on the list after our healthcare workers. And so I have been working with our local health department on coordinating when that's going to take place. And so we are anticipating the possibility of that taking place in the month of February. And the way that that will work is that we will get notified when the quarantine or when the vaccinations come in, and then we will have a window of time to make sure that we administer those vaccinations to our staff. And so one of the thoughts that we have is, if, depending on the timing of this, that we would have a Friday where students do not report to school. They have the remote learning experience while our staff has the opportunity to get their vaccinations that day. So we'll talk to you more about that once we have the details. There's a lot of more details to come together for that plan, but we are eager for this to take place, and we're grateful that the governor sees education as a critical piece of our infrastructure in our community in order to make this a priority. You know, as we end our first week back, probably several of us made jokes about saying goodbye to 2020 and then that all was behind us. And we all know, especially as adults, the reality is it's not behind us. We're still in this. We're still in this pandemic. We have a long road ahead of us. And even though there's hope ahead and there's great things happening, we know that it's not going to happen quickly. And now that we have the events that took place yesterday at our nation's capital, we just realize as we go back through our year, it's been a hard year. We have had racial injustice and tension throughout our entire nation. We have had political tension. And then we have this event that took place yesterday in our nation's capital. And as parents, you know, I'm a father of 4 in our district. We have moments where we just don't have all the answers. You know, we turn on the TV or we see something on our social media feed and it might catch us off guard. And we don't know how to respond to that. But I want to encourage all of us to make sure that we keep our conversations open with our kids. We need that conversation with our kids, even if they don't want to talk to you right away. I mean, I have teenagers and they don't always want to talk to you about everything, but continuing to check in with them, helping them make sense out of the world around us. Let me give you an example. My daughter's in 3rd grade, and so last night before we're going to bed, I know she saw images on TV. I know she saw things, and I know people will be talking about it in her classroom. So I just wanted to help her frame that up. And so what we did was we talked about Comet Kid. And we talked about what we saw here is in just dark contrast to what we talk about with Comet Kid. These behaviors are very different. So helping them see what's right and what's wrong and how to make sense out of that, and to have empathy and kindness for others, because in her classroom there are going to be other students that experience those images very differently because of their background, their story, and to be sensitive and caring for others in their class. You know, I talked to my boys who are older. I've got one in the high school, one in the middle school, just about the R factor and how we respond to events in the world around us. You know, we can't control the events, but we do have some control over our response. And the more we understand the layers of the event, whether it's the pieces we see on TV or the pieces we understand about the depths of what really happened in this national capital yesterday, understanding those layers helps us to respond with true empathy for our classmates. It helps us to make sense out of how do we live our lives in a way that honor democracy in our country. How do we do that in a way that honors our classmates? So as you're thinking through how to talk with your kids, just know you may not have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, but keep the conversation open so that we can care for our kids together as a community, so that we're stronger together. And I'll end with this. There are layers of this that will impact our mental health. That is a real reality for our kids and for you and for our teachers. We have resources here. We have a mental wellness team, and we have others that are ready to care for you. So if you ever need those resources, reach out to us. It would be our great privilege to serve you in that way. You know, it's been a hard week, and we're back, but we're doing this together. And I have confidence in our community. I have confidence in our comments. And I know that what we believe in here at Mason City Schools will continue to give us the energy that we need to move forward through this difficult time.